ओम परतत्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्ण समाज्ञया यो धर्म स्थापन रतो वीरेशं तं नमाम्यहम्. Who cares whether there is a Who cares whether there is a heaven or hell? Who cares if there is a soul or not? Who cares if there is an unchangeable or not? Here is the world and it is full of misery. Go out into it as Buddha did and struggle to lessen it or die in the attempt. Forget yourselves. This is the first lesson to be learned. Whether you are a theist or an atheist, whether you are an agnostic or a Vedantist, a Christian or a Mohammedan, from outside, the one lesson obvious to all is the destruction of the little self and the building up of the real self. So, Swamiji is not denying the real self, but this little self has to be destroyed. And when we destroy the little self, we gain the real self. That is practical Vedanta, most practical of all Vedantic ideas. Two forces have been working side by side in parallel lines. The one says I, the other says not I. Their manifestation is not only in man but in animals. Not only in animals but in the smallest worms. The tigress that plunges her fangs into the warm blood of a human being would give up her own life to protect her young. The most depraved man who thinks nothing of taking the lives of his brother men will perhaps sacrifice himself without any hesitation to save his starving wife and children. Thus, throughout creation, these two forces are working side by side. Where you find the one, you find the other also. Other two. The one is selfishness, the other is unselfishness. The one is acquisition, the other is renunciation. The one takes, the other gives. From the lowest to the highest, the whole universe is the playground of these two forces. It does not require any demonstration. It is obvious to all. So you can see Swamiji says with open eyes. What right has any section of the community to base the whole work and evolution of the universe upon one of these two factors alone? Upon competition and struggle? This is the Darwin's theory of evolution. That we evolve only when we struggle and compete with each other. And Swamiji is denying this in toto. Swamiji is denying this competition and struggle in toto. Swamiji is telling manifestation of the soul is the one force that is working. That these exist we do not deny. But what right has anyone to deny the working of the other force? Can any man deny that love, this not I, this renunciation is the only positive power in the universe? Swamiji has equated three things. Love, not I, renunciation. Unselfishness total is renunciation. And that is love. Love is nothing but unselfishness. Is the only positive power in the universe. That other is only the misguided employment of the power of love. Swamiji has shown about the tigers and all that. Misguided employment of the power of love. So Swamiji first said two powers are there, obvious. Why you should base only on this one? This you cannot deny this. And we say this is the only one. The other is a misguided employment of the one. So now Swamiji has resolved everything into Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. And he says this Brahman is Anandam, that is love. And Swamiji has talked about universal love right from the first part of Vedanta. Here he is equating that with unselfishness. The power of love brings competition. So competition also is from power of love. the real genesis of competition is in love. Love for yourself, love for the self of all. To manifest this universal reality, we are as if competing. The real genesis of evil is in unselfishness. Swami has shown, by misguided employment of unselfishness, this has come. The creator of evil is good, and the end is also good. It is only misdirection of the power of good. A man who murders another is perhaps moved to do so by his love of his own child. His love has become limited to that one little baby, to the exclusion of the millions of other human beings in this universe. Yet, limited or unlimited, it is the same love. Thus, the motive power of the whole universe, in whatever way it manifests itself, is that one wonderful thing, unselfishness, renunciation, love. He has repeated. The real, the only living force in existence. So the other force is only a reflection, misguided employment. Therefore, the Vedantists insist upon that oneness. We insist upon this explanation because we cannot admit two causes of the universe. If we simply hold that by limitation the same beautiful, wonderful love appears to be evil or vile, we find the whole universe explained by the one force of love. If not, two causes of the universe have to be taken for granted, one good and the other evil, one love and the other hatred. Which is more logical? Certainly the one force theory. Because he has told that the explanation comes from within and it is to be universal and there has to be unity, or that is the ultimate goal of Vedanta. So two forces is not rational. Though most of the dualists accept a God and a devil, and sometimes you wonder whether the devil is more powerful than God, because God creates and the devil destroys. But only one force is there. And so, that is called love. Let us now pass on to things which do not possibly belong to dualism. I cannot stay longer with the dualist, I am afraid. So Swamiji has started telling the good points of the dualist, but while telling the good point of the dualist, he has proved that they cannot explain anything. And he says, I cannot stay much longer with the dualist. So he said that dualism is a way to progress, but the ultimate truth it cannot be. My idea is to show that the highest ideal of morality and unselfishness goes hand in hand with the highest metaphysical conception. Advaita only can really give us morality and ethics. Dualist theories cannot give rationally. And that you need not lower your conception to get ethics and morality. People think that is theoretical, this is practical. Swamiji denies. Swamiji said the only truth can be made practical, is practical if you follow it properly. It ends in destruction of the little self and the manifestation of the higher self. But on the other hand, to reach a real basis of morality and ethics, you must have the highest philosophical and scientific conception. Swamiji has shown science. Human knowledge is not antagonistic to human well-being. The Christians thought that this modern science will be killing Christianity because they thought that duality is real. But Advaita is not afraid of any science or any rational thing. Let them apply all rational ideas and we will find that this stands the test, and from that we derive ethics or morality. We need not lower that. On the contrary, it is knowledge alone that will save us in every department of life. In knowledge is worship. In knowledge itself is worship. Worship again means destruction of I and glorification of you. That only is worship. And Swamiji has equated here knowledge and worship. In the Gita 18th chapter, Shankaracharya has equated knowledge and devotion. And that Swamiji is quoting here. The more we know, the better for us. Blindly we should not follow something. The Vedanta says the cause of all that is apparently evil is the limitation of the unlimited. That is Maya. Unlimited, we are limiting it, and that causes all evil. The love which gets limited into little channels and seems to be evil eventually comes out at the other end and manifests itself as God. So love he has equated with God or the reality. Anything limitation is Maya. The Vedanta also says that the cause of all this apparent evil is in ourselves. We do not require a devil. It is Maya working in us which is the cause of evil. Do not blame any supernatural being. Neither be hopeless and despondent. Oh, we are lost. No. You are, if you just discover your real nature, you are the strongest. Nor think we are in a place from which we can never escape, unless someone comes and lends us a helping hand. Those who are laden, heavy laden, come, I shall give you rest. Your reality is more strong. That cannot be said the Vedanta. We are like silkworms. We make the thread out of our own substance and spin the cocoon, and in course of time are imprisoned inside. This is Maya working. But this is not forever. In that cocoon we shall develop spiritual realization and like the butterfly come out free. That is what happens to the cocoon. It becomes the butterfly and comes out. This network of karma we have woven around ourselves very clearly stating. Karma is a bondage, it's a network. And in our ignorance we feel as if we are bound and weep and wail for help. So all this is only a wrong knowledge which has resulted into our weakness, but help does not come from without, it comes from within ourselves. Cry to all the gods in the universe. I cried for years. Swamiji is giving his own experience to prove that. And in the end I found that I have help. I was helped, but help came from within. And I had to undo what I had done by mistake. Searching outside. That is the only way. I had to cut the net which I had thrown around myself, and the power to do this is within. Of this I am certain that not one aspiration, well guided or ill guided, in my life has been in vain. Swamiji said, through mistakes I have grown. Everybody of us has grown through mistakes. Swamiji himself is telling. But that I am the resultant of all my past, both good and evil. I have committed many mistakes in my life, but mark you, I am sure of this, that without every one of those mistakes, I should not be what I am today. So, no need of despondency, mistake we learn. Experience account, we say. If you have done a mistake, we realize, we give it up, that is called experience. And through that we grow. Swamiji is saying, I do not mean that you have to go home and willfully commit mistakes. That will not make you grow. When you know it is a mistake, you should not do it. Do not misunderstand me in that way. But do not mope because of the mistake you have committed. Taittiriya Upanishad ends like that. He does not mope. But know that in the end, all will come out straight. It cannot be otherwise, because goodness is our nature, purity is our nature, and that nature can never be destroyed. Our essential nature always remains the same. Okay. What we are to understand is this, that what we call mistakes or evil, we commit because we are weak, and we are weak because we are ignorant. Wrong knowledge only has made us weak. And because of weakness, we commit mistakes. I prefer to call them mistakes. The word, because sin, they say, na, the word sin, although originally is a very good word, has got a certain flavor about it that frightens me. Who makes us ignorant? We ourselves. We put our hands over our eyes and weep that it is dark. Take the hands away and there is light. The light exists always for us. The self-effulgent nature of the human soul, that is the light inside. Do you not hear what your modern scientific men say? What is the cause of evolution? Desire. The animal wants to do something but does not find the environment favorable and therefore develops a new body. Who develops it? The animal itself. So from evolution, Swamiji is proving certain things. The animal itself, its will, you have developed from the lowest amoeba, every person. That evolution of species is a different thing. But you can see within our life, there was an amoeba and we have come out. Continue to exercise your will and it will take you higher still. So the evolution has not ended here. The will is almighty. If it is almighty, you may say, why cannot I do anything? But you are thinking only of your little self. Yes. So you cannot do anything. Look back on yourself from the state of the amoeba to the human being who made all that? Your own will. Can you deny then that it is almighty? That which has made you come up so high can make you go higher still. What you want is character, strengthening of the will, that is character. One example Swamiji has given. While climbing the mountain, many people give that example. While climbing the mountain, you see, oh, so much is yet to climb. Look back and see how much you have come up. Like that you have to go forward. So from amoeba to man, if we can imagine, like an infinite growth from the body point of view, so from man to God by the evolution of mind. So apply that will. The will is more important. What you want, if I teach you therefore that your nature is evil, that you should go home and sit in sackcloth and ashes and weep your lives out because you took certain false steps, it will not help you. But will weaken you all the more, and I shall be showing you the road to more evil than good by weeping. If this room is full of darkness for thousands of years, and you come in and begin to weep and wail, oh the darkness, will the darkness vanish? Strike a match and light comes in a moment. What good will it do? You to think all your life, oh I have done evil, I have made many mistakes. A common thing. It requires no ghost to tell us that. So long as we don't have right knowledge, mistakes will be there. Bring in the light and the evil goes in a moment. Build up your character and manifest your real nature, the effulgent, the resplendent, the ever pure, and call it up in everyone that you see. So when you have manifested that, help others to do the same. Tell everybody that you are the Atman. I wish that every one of us had come to such a state that even in the vilest of human beings, we could see the real self within. Sri Ramakrishna saw, Swami Vivekananda saw. We know the examples. In Egypt, Swami Vivekananda was traveling on foot in a city, and it was the duty of his escorts, the Western people, to guide Swamiji properly. But Swamiji was talking of God and everybody was lost. So, unknowingly they entered a lane which was full of prostitutes. And only after entering they realized. And Swamiji said, divinities, due to excessive attachment to body, see what they have done. That was Swamiji's vision. And that influenced those ladies so much, they became completely pure. So, that is what one has to do. And instead of condemning them, say, rise thou effulgent one, rise thou that art always pure, rise thou birthless and deathless, rise almighty and manifest that true nature. So the awakening is the main thing. These little manifestations do not befit thee. For everybody. This is the highest prayer that the Advaita teaches. This is the one prayer to remember our true nature. The God who is always within us, thinking of it always as infinite, almighty, ever good, ever beneficent, selfless, bereft of all limitation. In this way one has to think of oneself, practical Vedanta. And because that nature is selfless, it is strong and fearless. For only to selfishness comes fear. Yes. He who has nothing to desire for himself, whom does he fear? And what can frighten him? What fear has death for him? Because that is only for the body. What fear has evil for him? So if we are the Advaitis, we must think from this moment that our old self is dead and gone. The old Mr., Mrs. and Miss so and so are gone. They were mere superstitions. And what remains is the ever pure, the ever strong, the almighty, the all-knowing, that alone remains for us. So Swamiji is ending this practical Vedanta in this way. And then all fear vanishes from us. Who can injure us? The omnipresent. All weaknesses vanish from us, and our only work is to arouse this knowledge in our fellow being. It is both ways. If you try to arouse in fellow beings, it helps our own rise. And if we struggle for our own rise, it will help our fellow people. We see that they too are the same pure self, only they do not know it. We must teach them, we must help them to rouse up their infinite nature. This is what I feel to be absolutely necessary all over the world. These doctrines are old, older than many mountains possibly. They are eternal. All truth is eternal. Truth is nobody's property. No race, no individual can lay any exclusive claim to it. Nothing of India or Europe or all that. The rishis discovered it, that's all, but they are true universally. Truth is the nature of all souls. Who can lay any special claim to it? But it has to be made practical, to be made simple. For the highest truths are always simple, so that it may penetrate every pore of human society and become the property of the highest intellects and the commonest minds, of the man, woman and child at the same time. All these ratiocinations of logic, all these bundles of metaphysics, all these theologies and ceremonies may have been good in their own time, but let us try to make things simpler and bring about the golden days when every man will be a worshipper and the reality in every man will be the object of worship. Now, I have read everything, but Swamiji has referred to Buddha here. And we have seen at the end of Karma Yoga also, Swamiji put Buddha as the ideal Karma Yogi. And in Practical Vedanta in the last chapter, Swamiji again, he talks of Mohammedans, he talks of Christ, and he again brings Buddha. So, why it is so? Why Swamiji has brought Buddha? Now Swamiji is talking all this we have seen in 1896. Yes. Now a few years before this, during the 1890s, 1882 to 1890, before that the Western world did not know about Buddha. But there was a great English poet, Edwin Arnold, and he came across a book, Lalita Vistar, describing the life and achievement of Buddha. And he was so much influenced by that himself. He translated it into English poetry. He called it the light of Asia. Two more poems Edwin Arnold has translated. The Bhagavad Gita. He calls it the song celestial, Bhagavad Gita. And Kathopanishad, that he names as the song of death. Now, this light of Asia caught the minds of the Westerners. And any educated Westerner came to know about Buddha. So Buddha is something Swamiji is talking about to the English people because they all know him. And through him they can see the reality. Now there are hundreds of misconceptions about Buddha. The Hindus, Vedantis generally do not like his name even. But Swamiji has shown, he might not have read the Vedas, but his life is nothing but Vedanta. No I but thou. And so, I wish to tell you a little today, to catch what Swamiji is telling, I wish to tell you a little today of Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia, which is based upon the Lalita Vistar. Because many of us do not know about Buddha's life properly. Now it describes birth as Siddhartha, the prince of Kapilavastu. Kapilavastu is a district in Nepal, present-day Nepal, in the Lumbini province. And there he was born of Raja Shuddhodhan. And so his name was Siddhartha. And the astrologers had forecast that he will either become a very big king or become a sannyasi. So the Raja was afraid of his becoming a sannyasi. So he saw to it that no misery came to his life. Now we have air conditioners these days. But the king built 3 separate palaces for Buddha. Winter palace, summer palace, rainy season palace. And only when the season changes he had to shift. No sorrow he should see in his life. And then he was married. Yashodhara was beautiful and he had a son, Rahul. And he was spending his days in merriment outside. But then this pleasure continuity becomes bore. And that is what Raja thought, that he should see the world a little. And so he arranged a procession. And he announced that all the city should be decorated, there should not be any patient or sorrowful man, and everybody should appear happy. And so the prince will see the streets of the city and decoration and all that. He will feel little change and he will be refreshed. With that idea, procession was arranged. Now, an old man wanted to see the prince, and so he came with his sticks, and then he asked his friend in the chariot, "What is this?" He said, "This is old age." To whom does it come? To everybody. First, parichay with sorrow. First introduction with sorrow. He proceeded. A man having leprosy also came to see the Buddha. Buddha said, "What is this?" This is a disease. To whom it comes? To anyone it can come. So the second introduction to misery. He proceeded. Now king had declared a holiday, but the god of death had not taken holiday. So a man had died, and they tied his corpse to a cart, and they were carrying him with chanting and all that. Buddha said, what is this? His friend, that is the end of all. People have to die. So he had the third introduction to misery. And when he proceeded, he saw a sannyasin, a differently dressed. He asked, what is this? His friend said that he has realized all this misery and so he has left it. From that day onwards, Buddha could not sleep properly. He could not enjoy anything. So mind you, unselfishness to the extreme. Buddha did not do any sadhana to remove his own misery. He had no miseries in life. But Buddha saw that the world is full of misery. And how I can help it to get rid of misery? That was the only sadhana which he did. Then he left his wife and young child, and in the dead of night he went away. And he joined whatever sampradayas were there. And he practiced sadhana with all of them. Some people believe that we should eat too much. Some people believe we should fast too much. All sorts of sadhanas and all sorts of habits he underwent. Finally, he understood all of them, that is no, we have to follow a middle path and the main is to meditate. So with that idea, he sat under the Bo tree that I shall not get up till I realize the highest knowledge. And so he got the enlightenment. After long years of meditation, travels, then Buddha started traveling. After he got his enlightenment, he started traveling because the purpose of his life was to tell people how to get rid of misery. So he traveled and his message was, now his message, three noble truths they say. Suffering is a built-in aspect of existence. Suffering is a built-in aspect of existence. That is the noble truth. That craving for sensuality and identity is the root of suffering. Craving for some enjoyment and I, that is the root of all miseries. Craving for enjoyment and search for identity. I do not know what I am. And so I am miserable. This is, he found out, that there is misery, there is cause of misery. And if we can remove that cause of misery, we will remove the misery automatically. And that suffering can be ended by removing the cause. Then he formulated his theories and said 8 things you have to do rightly. Right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And when he travelled throughout length and breadth of India, he was joined by thousands of disciples and admirers from all walks of life. That much is Edwin Arnold has described about Buddha. And that is why Swamiji has put, and that has become well known to the Westerners. And so Swamiji is quoting Buddha in Karma Yoga and Buddha in Practical Vedanta. Now let me tell you a little about what connection is with Buddha with the Ramakrishna mission or Sri Ramakrishna's disciples. When Sri Ramakrishna was physically suffering from cancer and Swami Vivekananda and all the disciples were engaged day and night in their own tapasya and serving Sri Ramakrishna, they started discussing, Swami Vivekananda started discussing with his brother disciples the life and ideals of Buddha. And then without telling the others, Shivananda Swami, Mahapurush Maharaj, he had the same type of thinking. And Kali Maharaj, Swami Abhedananda, he was philosophical bent. So with these two friends, without telling others, he went away from Kashipur, where Sri Ramakrishna was being nursed, and went to Buddha Gaya. Now while meditating under the Bodhi tree, suddenly Swami Vivekananda burst out weeping and embraced Shivananda Swami or Mahapurush Maharaj who was sitting next to him. Nobody talked. Then they pacified themselves. What do we understand from this? About Kali Maharaj, I am telling you, was a philosopher. But these two were in their blood and thinking of the Buddhist ideology. Not Buddhism as we understand it. But what Swamiji is telling in this practical Vedanta, the destruction of the little I is the only way to realize the real I. There is no other way. And this was common between Mahapurush Maharaj and Swami Vivekananda. Perhaps in their past lives they were associates of Buddha, and that is why Swamiji embraced Mahapurush Maharaj by some old memory. One incident. Second incident, Swamiji had a Western disciple, Sister Christine. And to her, Swamiji described in great vivid details a monastery where he had stayed in some age past. He did not tell any name or location, but he described vividly the monastery. Now, Sister Christine happened to go to Mumbai, and upland Mumbai, there is a few miles from the seashore, there is what is called Canary Caves. Caves means buildings inside mountains. Canary is the name of the place. And when Sister Christine went there, she saw a Buddhist monastery. Not flourishing, only structures. And she immediately realized that this is the exact situation which Swami Vivekananda has described. So, Swami Vivekananda had spent a life in a Buddhist monastery as a Buddhist. These two incidents I am quoting to show that in blood, in mind, mental makeup, and we see incidents from his very childhood, how unselfish he was, how he was ready to die for others. And this has made Buddha very dear to us. Let me tell you one personal thing also. Personal in the sense I have told about it. My Guruji, in the Upanishads, Chandogya Upanishad, Sadeva Somya Idamagre Asid Ekameva Dvitiyam Kechit tu Ahu Asadeva Somya Idamagre Asid Ekameva Dvitiyam. That this world in the beginning, that means before it was created, there was only Sat Brahma, one without a second. And then the Rishi says, some people say that in the beginning there was nothing, all this was not there. Now that I came to know much later when I read the Chandogya. But my teacher, without adding this kichit to how he used to tell me, do you know what the rishis have said? Sadaiva Swammai Damagre Asid Ekameva Ditiyam. Asadeva Swammai Damagre Asid Ekameva Ditiyam. He used to put both as rishis have said. Now let us try to understand that. Idam agre asit. Idam means this world which we see. Agre means before it was created. Now if we lay emphasis on before it was created what was there, the answer will be one reality alone. If we emphasize on this world which we see, this world which we see, before creation what it was nothing. It was not there. Before what was there? Reality. But what was this world before creation? Nothing. Same idea we see repeated in Taittiriya Upanishad. Asadvaidamagre asid. So, unnecessarily, the Vedantists or Shankarites blame Buddha or misunderstand him to the extent they hate him. We have to understand what Swamiji is telling, what Swamiji has understood in his blood, that unless this little self and the associated world, the craving in the associated world are destroyed, you cannot get the absolute reality. This is the lesson which my Guru also has taught me. This is the connection that I will start from Sri Ramakrishna now. Sri Ramakrishna had a small idol of Buddha in his room and used to often talk about Buddha. Somebody asked him, but Buddha did not believe in a God. Why do you talk about him? Sri Ramakrishna said, why will he believe in God? He was God himself. So belief is an indirect matter in our mind, but he was God himself. So we have to get at this point. Let us in the name of narrow Vedanta not hate or criticize Buddha or Buddhism. Let us understand the fact that what Swamiji is telling so much emphatically in the last lecture, that unless the small self is destroyed by illumination, when the small self is destroyed, then only the real self will shine. So we can understand Buddhism and Vedanta together. Buddhism emphasizes on the destruction of the small self. Vedanta posits the reality of the real self. So, without this, that does not happen. And so, in the Shankar Bhashya and Chandogya Upanishad, he has raised this point. Why talk of this negativism? And he says that unless we follow that, we cannot come to real positivity. So, practical Vedanta, Swamiji has harmonized Buddhistic ideals with the Vedantic ideals. That destruction of the self on the physical or limited level, and then only manifestation of the self on the universal or infinite level will take place. And that Swamiji was telling from the beginning that universal we can understand, individual we cannot understand at all. Then he talked about the individuals to the extent there were some good points in dualism, and then he came heavily against them, telling they have caused bloodshed in life. Now within Hinduism we shall say, they might not have caused bloodshed, but they spent whole their life in criticizing the other party. Same should not happen to the practical Vedantist. The practical Vedantist has illumination, and in that illumination he has seen that the little self is a superstition. It is a superimposition. It is a wrong limitation. And every wrong limitation causes hatred, fear, evil, sin, everything. And if it is explained that real you are the universal, then this vanishes, the man becomes a blessing to society and he helps others to gain the same thing. That is the fourth part of the practical Vedanta. Let me make a small announcement. As you know, all of you, Advaita Ashram has circulated also that I told you repeatedly that practical Vedanta is a part of Jnana Yoga. We have taken it first to make us practically oriented, and now from the coming Thursday I will be trying to read and explain to you Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. And so we take leave of this practical Vedanta, not take leave, but having filled ourselves with that, we shall approach the Swamiji's Jnana Yoga, which is Swamiji's lectures on other Upanishads, including one on Chandogya, from the coming Thursday. Om Paratatve Sada Lino Ramakrishna Samagya Yo Dharma Stapana Rato Vire Shamtam Namamyaham. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.